The ship drifted slowly toward Earth Station Prime, its crystalline hull catching the light of distant stars. Inside the vessel, Ambassador prepared himself for what he believed would be a simple meeting. His species had never been warriors. They had never needed to be. For 10,000 years they had lived in peace, their bodies made of living crystal that sang with the harmonies of the universe. They were scientists, artists, and philosophers. They were not fighters. But the had changed everything. Remembered the first attack on the outer colonies. He remembered the screams that came through the communication channels before they went silent. He remembered the images of children being dragged into slave ships, their crystal forms cracking under rough handling. His people were dying, and they had no way to stop it. That was why he had come to Earth. The humans were a young species by galactic standards. They had only achieved faster than light travel 60 years ago, but in that short time they had built a reputation that spread across 100 star systems. They came from a world that other species called a planet where the gravity was crushing, the predators were endless, and even the smallest creatures carried poison in their blood. The humans had not just survived on this hellish world, they had conquered it. Did not want an army, he only wanted teachers. A few human soldiers who could show his people how to hold a weapon, how to stand their ground, how to protect their children. It was a small request. Surely the humans would understand. The docking clamps engaged with a soft thud and walked through the airlock into the station. The air was thicker here, heavier. He could feel the increased gravity pulling at his crystalline form. This was normal Earth gravity, he reminded himself. The humans lived with this weight pressing down on them every moment of their lives. Two human officers waited for him in the corridor. The first was a tall male with gray hair and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at him. His uniform carried the markings of an admiral. The second was a female with dark skin and a face that held both kindness and steel in equal measure. She wore the rank of captain. Admiral Jake extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Had studied human customs, so he reached out and allowed the admiral to grasp his crystalline fingers. The human grip was firm but careful, aware of how fragile bodies could be. Ambassador said, "Welcome to Earth Station Prime. I am Admiral Jake and this is Captain Carter. We are honored by your visit." Inclined his head, his crystal structure chiming softly. "The honor is mine, Admiral. The people have not forgotten the kindness humanity showed us during first contact. Your doctors saved many of our people when the crystal plague struck our." Captain Carter smiled warmly. "We were happy to help, Ambassador. Your people shared star charts and medical knowledge with us freely. We consider that to be among our closest friends in this galaxy." They walked together through the station corridors, past human crew members who stopped to stare at the crystalline alien in their midst. Noticed how the humans moved, how they carried themselves. There was a confidence in their steps, a readiness in their posture. Even the youngest crew members walked like predators. The council chamber was a large room with a curved window that looked out into space. Earth hung in the distance, a blue and green marble wrapped in white clouds. Had seen many worlds in his long life, but there was something about the human that made his crystal resonate with unease. It looked beautiful and peaceful from this distance. But he knew what lurked beneath those clouds. Sharks and lions and venomous snakes. Volcanoes and earthquakes and hurricanes. A world that had been trying to kill its children since the first cell divided in the ancient oceans. And yet here the humans stood, masters of that deadly world and now reaching for the stars. They sat around a curved table and began to explain the situation. He told them about the raids, about the colonies that had been destroyed, about the thousands of who had been taken as slaves. His voice remained calm, but his light flickered with grief as he spoke. Admiral listened without interruption, his face growing harder with each detail. Captain Carter made notes on a data pad, her expression unreadable. When finished, there was a long moment of silence. "We cannot fight them," said finally. "Our bodies are fragile. Our weapons are designed for hunting small animals, not for war. We have shields that can protect our cities for a time, but they will eventually break through. When that happens, my people will be exterminated or enslaved. All of them." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "We do not ask for much. We know that humanity has its own concerns, its own enemies. We ask only for a small group of your soldiers, perhaps a dozen. They could train our people in basic combat, teach us how to defend ourselves. We have seen recordings of human warriors in battle. Your endurance, your strength, your ability to continue fighting even when wounded. If our people could learn even a fraction of these skills, it might be enough to buy us time." Admiral leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving. There was something in his gaze that they could not identify. It might have been anger at the. It might have been sympathy for the people, or it might have been something else entirely. "Ambassador," said slowly, "I want you to understand something about humanity. When we call someone a friend, we do not abandon them. When we give our word, we keep it. And when someone threatens people under our protection, we do not respond with half measures." Tilted his head, confused. "I am not sure I understand, Admiral. We only need trainers, a small contingent. We do not wish to burden humanity with our problems." Captain Carter and Admiral exchanged a look that could not interpret. There was a silent communication between them, a shared understanding that came from years of working together. "We will send what is appropriate," said finally. "I promise you, Ambassador, the people will not face this threat alone." Felt relief wash through his crystalline form. A dozen human soldiers, perhaps some weapons and training equipment. It was more than he had dared to hope for. He thanked the Admiral profusely, his light dancing with gratitude. He did not notice the small smile that crossed Captain Carter's face. He did not see the way hands had clenched into fists when he spoke of the. He did not understand what the word appropriate meant in human military doctrine. He would learn soon enough. 3 standard weeks passed after returned home with the promise of human assistance. The High Council had been pleased by the news. A dozen human trainers would arrive soon, they told their people. Help was coming. There was hope. Stood at the primary viewport of the capital ship Serene Light, watching the stars. The ship floated near the designated arrival point, waiting for the human transport to emerge from faster-than-light transit. He had prepared quarters for the trainers, simple but comfortable rooms with adjusted gravity and lighting. He had arranged for translation devices and cultural guides. Everything was ready. The space before him rippled like water disturbed by a thrown stone. This was normal. Ships emerging from faster-than-light travel always created this effect. Watched with anticipation as the first vessel materialized from the distortion. It was not a transport ship. The USS Liberty emerged from transit like a beast rising from the deep ocean. It was massive, larger than any vessel had ever seen. Its hull was covered with weapons platforms and fighter bays, each one capable of launching dozens of small attack craft. The ship bristled with power, with threat, with the promise of violence on a scale that made its crystal structure vibrate with primal fear. But the Liberty was only the beginning. 2 more ships emerged from transit behind the carrier. These were battle cruisers, their names painted on their hulls in bold letters. The USS Defiance and the USS Resolve. Both ships bore the scars of previous battles, patches of different colored metal where damaged sections had been replaced. These were not parade vessels. These were warriors that had seen combat and survived. The space continued to ripple as more ships arrived. Destroyers came next, 12 of them moving in perfect formation. They were smaller than the battle cruisers but fast and deadly, designed to hunt and kill with cold efficiency. Their squadron was called Thunder Wing, and they moved like predators circling prey. Supply ships followed, their holds filled with weapons and ammunition and spare parts. Medical frigates arrived with hospitals built into their frames, ready to receive wounded and heal them so they could fight again. Electronic warfare vessels emerged, their hulls covered with sensors and jammers and equipment that could not identify. A mobile shipyard dropped out of transit, a massive structure capable of building new ships or repairing damaged ones in the field. Troop transports appeared, each one carrying hundreds of human soldiers in their armored holds. Scout ships and reconnaissance drones and communication relays filled the spaces between the larger vessels. By the time the transit window finally closed, 47 human warships hung in space. They formed a defensive formation around the serene light, their weapons systems humming with readiness. The stars themselves seemed dimmer compared to the running lights of the human armada. Stood frozen at the viewport, his crystalline form resonating with shock. His light flickered through colors that had no names, emotions that his species rarely experienced. Fear and awe and confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of hope. Aboard the Liberty, Commander Price stood on the bridge beside Lieutenant. The tactical display before them showed the vessel surrounded by their fleet, a single crystal flower protected by a garden of steel thorns. "Think we it, sir?" asked. There was a slight smile on her face, but her eyes were serious. Price shook his head. "Intelligence reports indicate they have at least 80 combat-ready ships. They have been expanding aggressively for 3 decades, conquering species and absorbing their resources. This is the minimum viable force for a defensive operation in hostile territory." Nodded, her fingers moving across her console as she ran diagnostics on the electronic warfare systems. "They are hailing us, sir. Ambassador is requesting to speak with Admiral." "Put him through to the Admiral's ready room," Price ordered. "I suspect this conversation will be interesting." In his private quarters aboard the Liberty, Admiral Jake accepted the communication request. The holographic image appeared before him, and could see immediately that he was struggling to process what he had witnessed. "Admiral," said, his voice trembling through the translator, "we asked for trainers, we asked for a dozen soldiers. What is this?" Stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression calm and patient. "Ambassador, I told you that we would send what is appropriate. This is what appropriate looks like when human friends are threatened." "But this is a fleet," stammered. "This is an invasion force. We asked for help, not a war." "With respect, Ambassador, you already have a war. They brought it to your doorstep when they attacked your colonies and enslaved your people. The only question now is whether you will face that war alone or with allies standing beside you." Light flickered rapidly, a sign of deep emotional disturbance. "We cannot ask humanity to fight our battles. We cannot ask your soldiers to die for us. This is too much. We only wanted teachers." His expression softened slightly. "Ambassador, I have read the reports about what they did to your outer colonies. I have seen the images of children being dragged into slave ships. I have studied the intelligence on their expansion patterns and their treatment of conquered species." He stepped closer to the holographic display, his eyes meeting. "The people showed humanity kindness when we first ventured into the stars. You shared your knowledge freely. You treated us as equals when many species dismissed us as primitive newcomers. You called us friends when we had no friends among the stars." His voice hardened. "Now your people are suffering, your children are being stolen, your colonies are burning, and you ask why we have come with a fleet instead of a handful of trainers." He shook his head slowly. "Ambassador, this is how humanity protects its friends. We do not send token gestures. We do not offer thoughts and prayers while standing safely at a distance. When humans commit to a cause, we commit everything. Every ship, every soldier, every resource we can spare, because that is what friendship means to us." Was silent for a long moment, his crystal form pulsing with light that shifted through a dozen colors. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "We did not know. We did not understand what we were asking for." "No," agreed. "You asked for help, and help is exactly what you received. The question now, Ambassador, is what we do next. They will not ignore this fleet sitting in their territory of expansion. They will come. And when they do, we need to be ready. Captain Carter's voice came through the communication system. Admiral, we are receiving reports from border stations. Scout ships have been detected monitoring our arrival. It appears word is already spreading. Nodded grimly. Let them watch. Let them count our ships and report back to their warlord. Let them understand that the rules of this game have changed. He turned back to his holographic image. Ambassador, I suggest you return to your and inform your High Council. Humanity stands with. Whatever comes next, your people will not face it alone. The communication ended and remained standing at the viewport of the serene light. Around him, the human armada held its position, weapons ready, crews alert. They had asked for a small kindness. They had received an army. For the first time since the attacks began, allowed himself to feel something other than fear. He did not know if it was hope or simply the absence of despair. But as he watched the human ship standing guard over his people, he began to understand what it truly meant to have as friends. The weeks that followed the arrival of the human fleet changed everything they believed about the universe and their place in it. They had always known that other species were different from them. They had read reports and studied data about the violent worlds that produced warrior races. But reading about and living among them were two entirely different experiences. Sergeant Ben Cooper led the ground training exercises on Prime. He was a broad-shouldered man with a scar running down his left cheek and hands that looked like they had been carved from stone. When he walked, the ground seemed to shake beneath his boots. When he spoke, even the bravest warriors felt the urge to step back. The first training session drew hundreds of observers. They gathered in the crystalline amphitheater that had been built for concerts and poetry readings, watching as Cooper and his squad demonstrated basic combat techniques. What they witnessed that day would be discussed in academies for generations. Cooper began with a simple demonstration of human endurance. He ordered his soldiers to run laps around the amphitheater at full speed. He expected them to tire after a few circuits. Instead, the humans ran for 2 hours without stopping. Their bodies were covered in sweat, a biological cooling system that they found both fascinating and disturbing. When they finally stopped, they were breathing hard but still standing, still ready to continue. Your species can maintain this level of exertion for how long? One scientist asked, his crystal form flickering with disbelief. Cooper wiped the sweat from his forehead with a casual gesture. Depends on the individual. Trained soldiers can march for days with minimal rest. There are humans who run races that last over 100 miles. Our ancestors hunted prey by chasing them until they collapsed from exhaustion. We call it persistence hunting. They exchanged glances of shock. Their own bodies could move quickly in short bursts, but sustained physical activity was foreign to their biology. The idea of chasing prey until it simply gave up and died was horrifying in its implications. The next demonstration was even more disturbing. Private Torres stepped forward with a medical kit and a sharp blade. Before anyone could react, she drew the blade across her palm, opening a wound that bled red onto the white stone floor. Several cried out in alarm. Among their species, such an injury would require immediate medical intervention and weeks of careful regeneration. But Torres simply pressed a bandage against the cut, wrapped it tightly, and flexed her hand to show that she could still grip her weapon. Human bodies heal, she explained calmly. Cuts and bruises repair themselves within days. Broken bones take a few weeks but mend stronger than before. We have been injured and recovered so many times throughout our evolution that our bodies have become experts at putting themselves back together. A elder approached, his ancient crystal form clouded with age but his mind still sharp. We have heard stories, he said slowly. Stories that humans have survived injuries that would kill any other species. Limbs lost and replaced with machines. Organs transplanted from one body to another. Is this true? Cooper nodded. We have soldiers serving in this fleet who have lost arms, legs, eyes. We rebuild them. We give them mechanical replacements or grow new parts in laboratories, and they return to duty, because giving up is not in our nature. The elder stared at Cooper for a long moment. Your species does not accept death easily. No, sir, Cooper agreed. We fight it every step of the way. While the ground forces trained the volunteers, Lieutenant Commander coordinated the construction of a defensive grid throughout space. Sensor platforms were deployed at strategic points, their systems constantly scanning for any sign of approach. Early warning stations were placed along the most likely invasion routes. Automated defense platforms were assembled and positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. The work was exhausting and relentless. Human engineers worked in shifts around the clock, sleeping in 4-hour rotations so that construction never stopped. The who assisted them marveled at this dedication, at the way humans pushed their bodies to the breaking point and then pushed further. Captain Carter spent her days visiting the outer colonies that had been attacked by the. She walked through the ruins of cities that had once been beautiful, her boots crunching on broken crystal and scorched stone. She interviewed survivors, recorded their testimonies, documented every atrocity with cold precision. What she found made her sick with anger. They were not simply raiders. They were systematic in their cruelty. They took the young and healthy as slaves. They killed the old and weak for sport. They destroyed cultural artifacts and historical records, erasing the identity of the species they conquered. It was genocide conducted with bureaucratic efficiency. Carter compiled her findings into a report and transmitted it to Admiral aboard the Liberty. She recommended that the rules of engagement be modified to reflect the nature of the enemy they faced. Read the report alone in his quarters. His hands shook as he scrolled through the images of dead children and burned cities. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long time, staring at the wall. Then he called his communications officer. "Get me a direct channel to the leadership," he ordered. "Maximum power broadcast. I want every ship in this sector to hear what I have to say." It took several hours to establish the connection. They were not eager to speak with the humans they viewed as primitive newcomers. But eventually, Warlord Vex appeared on the screen, his reptilian features twisted into an expression of amused contempt. "You are the human commander?" Vex asked. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "I have heard stories about your species, fierce little predators from a harsh world, but I see only a small fleet hiding behind the glass people. Are you here to offer tribute, to beg for mercy?" Stood before them with his hands clasped behind his back. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with cold fire. "I am Admiral Jake of the United Earth Fleet. I am here to deliver a message, not to negotiate. You have one standard week to release all prisoners and withdraw your forces from this sector. After that deadline passes, we will no longer be interested in discussion." Vex laughed. It was an ugly sound like breaking bones. "Threats from primitives. The Dominion has conquered 30 species. We have crushed empires that existed before your ancestors climbed down from trees. What makes you believe humans will be different?" Smiled, it was not a pleasant expression. "Because we come from a warlord. Everything on our planet has spent 4 billion years learning to kill everything else. Predators and prey locked in an endless arms race of claws and teeth and poison and cunning. We did not become the dominant species on Earth by being peaceful. We did it by being more dangerous than everything that tried to eat us." He stepped closer to the. "You have conquered pacifists and traders and scholars, species that had forgotten how to fight or never learned in the first place. But humans remember. We have been fighting each other and everything around us since we first picked up stones and sharpened sticks. War is in our blood, it is written in our bones, and now you have threatened people we call friends." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. "1 week, warlord. Release the prisoners, withdraw your forces, or learn what happens when you make enemies of." The transmission ended. Vex stared at the blank screen for a long moment, his clawed hands gripping the arms of his throne. Then he turned to his advisors and began to give orders. The deadline was set, the pieces were moving, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, the storm was gathering. The response came on the 6th day, one day before the deadline would expire. Perhaps Warlord Vex wanted to catch the humans off guard. Perhaps he simply could not wait any longer to crush these arrogant primitives who had dared to threaten him. Whatever his reasons, the result was the same. 83 warships dropped out of faster-than-light transit at the edge of space. They emerged in a massive wave of distorted space and flashing energy, their weapons already charging for battle. The ships were ugly things, built for function rather than form. Their hulls were covered with spikes and armor plates, giving them the appearance of angry sea creatures from some nightmare ocean. Vex broadcast his declaration on all frequencies. His reptilian face filled every screen in the sector as he spoke. To the humans and their crystal pets, hear my words. The Dominion does not accept threats from lesser species. We do not retreat. We do not surrender. Today we add another conquest to our eternal empire. Today you learn the price of defiance. Aboard the Liberty, Admiral Jake watched the enemy fleet approach on the tactical display. The red icons representing ships outnumbered the blue icons of his own fleet nearly 2 to 1. By conventional military wisdom, he should be preparing for a defensive action, protecting the while waiting for reinforcements, but had never been a conventional commander. All ships execute Battle Plan Delta, he ordered. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had made peace with whatever was about to happen. Show them what can do. The human fleet surged forward. They expected their enemies to form defensive lines and wait for the assault. Every species they had ever conquered had done exactly that, hiding behind shields and hopping to survive the onslaught. But the humans did not hide. They attacked. Commander Price led the destroyer squadron Thunder Wing in a devastating flanking maneuver. The 12 ships of his command peeled away from the main fleet and accelerated to attack speed, their engines burning hot as they curved around the edge of the formation. They hit the enemy flank like a knife sliding between ribs, their weapons tearing through unprepared ships before they even understood what was happening. Target their communication ships first, Price ordered. Blind them, confuse them, make them fight alone. The destroyers obeyed, their guns speaking in synchronized bursts that ripped through the hulls of command vessels. One by one, the ships that coordinated enemy movements went dark, leaving the rest of the fleet struggling to maintain formation. Lieutenant coordinated the electronic warfare assault from her station aboard the Liberty. Her fingers danced across the controls as she directed a storm of interference and false signals at the enemy fleet. Sensors showed phantom ships appearing from impossible directions, their communication channels filled with static and ghost voices, targeting computers locked onto decoys while real threats approached unseen. They are breaking formation, reported, a fierce smile crossing her face. Their ships are scattering, they do not know what is real anymore. In the center of the engagement, the battle cruisers Defiance and Resolve pushed directly into the heart of the enemy fleet. Captain Greg Mason commanded the Defiance from its battle bridge, surrounded by displays showing damage reports and weapons status. His ship had already taken 3 direct hits, but the heavy armor was holding. Beside him, the Resolve under Captain Rhodes matched him shot for shot, the 2 vessels supporting each other like soldiers fighting back to back. All forward batteries, continuous fire, Mason ordered. Do not let them regroup. The battle cruisers unleashed everything they had. Heavy cannons roared in the silence of space, sending slugs of superheated metal screaming into hulls. Missile banks emptied themselves in waves of explosive death. Energy weapons carved burning lines across enemy armor. The ships that had expected easy prey found themselves facing predators with teeth of steel and fire. Squadron leader Tyler Grant led the fighters that poured from the Liberty's launch bays. His pilots were the best humanity had to offer, men and women who had been trained to push their bodies beyond normal limits. The G-forces they pulled in combat would crush most species into unconsciousness, but human hearts pumped blood to human brains with stubborn determination. "Stay in pairs," Grant commanded as his fighter dove toward an enemy cruiser. "Watch your wingman. Kill everything that is not us." The fighters swarmed through the fleet like angry wasps. They were too small and fast for the heavy weapons of the enemy warships to track. They slipped through gaps in the formation and struck at vulnerable points, then vanished before retaliation could find them. Engine sections exploded. Sensor arrays went dark. Weapon mounts were torn away by precise strikes. But the battle was not one-sided. There were not weak enemies. They had conquered 30 species, and they had not done so by accident. Their weapons were powerful, their ships were tough, and their warriors did not know fear. The destroyer Thunderbolt took a direct hit that ripped through its engine section. The ship tumbled out of control, its crew fighting to restore power as atmosphere vented into space. The frigate's swift strike was caught in a crossfire between two battleships and torn apart in seconds, all hands lost. Fighters were swatted from the sky by defensive fire, their pilots dying alone in the cold darkness. Sergeant Ben Cooper and his ground forces launched their boarding action 3 hours into the battle. The transport ship carried them through the chaos of the space engagement, its pilot dodging debris and weapons fire with desperate skill. They latched onto a carrier and cut their way through its hull. The fighting inside the enemy ship was brutal and close. The warriors were larger than humans, standing over 7 feet tall with scales that could deflect glancing blows. They fought with bladed weapons and natural claws, preferring the intimacy of close combat to the distance of guns. Cooper met them without fear. His rifle spoke again and again, dropping enemies before they could close the distance. When a warrior finally reached him and slashed with its claws, the blow caught his left arm and burned through flesh to the bone. Cooper screamed in pain but did not fall. He drew his sidearm with his right hand and put 3 rounds through the creature's skull. "Sergeant, you are injured," one of his soldiers said. "We need to get you to medical." Cooper shook his head, wrapping a field bandage around his ruined arm with his teeth in one hand. "Medical is busy. We have a ship to take. Move." Private Torres fought beside him with 2 cracked ribs from a hit she had taken during the initial breach. Her breathing came in short gasps of pain, but her aim never wavered. She led her fire team through the carrier's corridors, clearing room after room with methodical efficiency. When they reached the bridge, she was the first through the door, her rifle already firing before her feet touched the deck. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it finally ended, the space around was filled with the wreckage of ships and the bodies of the dead. The fleet had been broken. 61 of their 83 ships had been destroyed or captured. The survivors fled into uncharted space, their engines burning at maximum as they ran from the nightmare they had awakened. Warlord Vex was among the dead. His flagship had been targeted by the combined fire of the Defiance and Resolve, and not even armor could withstand that punishment. The tyrant who had boasted of eternal empire died screaming as his ship broke apart around him. The human fleet had paid its own price. 7 ships had been destroyed. 12 more were damaged badly enough to require the mobile shipyard for repairs. 842 men and women had given their lives in defense of people they had never met, for a species that had simply asked for help. Aboard the Serene Light watched the aftermath in stunned silence. His crystal form was dim with grief and shock. Around him, others wept tears of light, mourning the dead of both species. Admiral's holographic image appeared beside him, the human commander looking tired but unbowed. "It is over, Ambassador. They will not threaten your people again." Turned to face him, his voice barely a whisper. "You lost so many of your people died, for us. For strangers you had no obligation to protect." Shook his head slowly. "You were never strangers, Ambassador. You asked for our help. That made you family, and humans do not abandon their family no matter the cost. The stars continued to shine over the battlefield, indifferent to the death and heroism that had occurred in their light. But for those who survived, the universe would never look the same again. The months that followed the battle have changed the balance of power across 100 star systems. Word of the human victory spread faster than light, carried by traders and refugees and spies who had witnessed the impossible. The Dominion, which had seemed invincible for so long, had been broken by a species that most of the galaxy had dismissed as primitive newcomers. The Dominion itself began to crumble from within. Without Warlord Vex to hold it together through fear and force, the conquered species saw their chance for freedom. Rebellions erupted on a dozen worlds. Former slaves turned on their masters with weapons they had hidden for generations. The so used to fighting outmatched opponents suddenly found themselves surrounded by enemies who had learned that the invincible could be defeated after all. Some of those rebelling species sent messages to the human fleet, asking for the same help that they had received. Admiral forwarded these requests to Earth Command with his recommendation that humanity honor as many as possible. He understood what they were only beginning to learn. When chose to protect the weak, they created bonds that could reshape civilizations. Earth Command agreed. Over the following year, human ships and soldiers were deployed to assist 6 different species in throwing off rule. Each mission followed the same pattern that had begun with the local populations asked for small help. Humanity responded with overwhelming force. Former slaves became free citizens of their own worlds again. The rescued species did not forget who had freed them. One by one, they joined what came to be called the Human Coalition. It was not an empire in the traditional sense. Humanity did not demand tribute or submission. They asked only for friendship and mutual defense, for trade agreements that benefited all parties, for the sharing of knowledge and culture. Many species found this confusing at first. They were accustomed to conquerors who took everything and gave nothing in return. The idea of allies who simply wanted to help was strange and wonderful. They became the first non-human members of the coalition, a position of honor they held with deep pride. Their crystalline technology was shared freely with their human friends, advancing human medicine and energy production by decades. In return, human engineers helped to develop defensive systems that would protect them from future threats. Was chosen to serve as the first ambassador to Earth. It was a position of immense responsibility, bridging 2 cultures that could not have been more different, but had come to understand humans in ways that few of his species ever would. He had seen them fight and die for strangers. He had witnessed their stubborn refusal to abandon those they had promised to protect. He knew what beat beneath the surface of these frightening, and it was not cruelty or aggression. It was love so fierce that it would cross galaxies to defend its objects. The ceremony took place in the Great Hall of the United Earth Council, a massive chamber that had been built to accommodate diplomats from 100 different species. Humans filled most of the seats, their curious eyes watching as the crystalline alien took the stage. But scattered among them were representatives of the other coalition species, beings of various shapes and sizes who had come to witness this historic moment. Admiral Jake sat in the front row beside Captain Carter. Both wore their dress uniforms, covered with medals that represented decades of service. His hair had grown grayer since the battle, and there were new lines on his face. But his eyes were still sharp, still watching, still ready to protect those he cared about. Sergeant Ben Cooper sat a few rows back, his left arm now a sophisticated prosthetic that moved as smoothly as flesh. The scars on his face had faded to thin white lines, but he wore them proudly. Private Torres sat beside him, her ribs long since healed but the memories of that desperate boarding action still fresh in her mind. Lieutenant was there as well, along with Commander Price and Squadron Leader Tyler Grant and dozens of other officers and soldiers who had fought at. They had been invited as honored guests, though many of them felt uncomfortable with the attention. They had only done their jobs. They had only kept their promises. Stepped up to the speaking platform, his crystalline form projecting colors of deep gratitude and solemn respect. The translator device at his throat hummed as he began to speak. 1 year ago, I came to this world with a simple request. My people were dying. Our colonies were burning. Our children were being stolen by monsters who saw them only as resources to be harvested. We had no weapons and no warriors. We had only hoped that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, we might find someone willing to help. He paused, his light shifting through subtle shades of blue and gold. We asked for trainers, a dozen soldiers to teach our people how to hold weapons and stand their ground. It was a small request, or so we thought. We did not understand what we were truly asking. We did not know what the word help meant to humans. A soft murmur passed through the crowd, waited for it to fade before continuing. Instead of trainers, you sent an armada. Instead of a dozen soldiers, you sent thousands. You brought your mightiest ships and your bravest warriors. You crossed the stars to stand between us and destruction. And when the enemy came, you met them with fire and steel and the fury of a species that does not know how to abandon its friends. His voice grew quieter, more personal. 842 humans died defending. 842 sons and daughters and siblings and parents who will never go home. They gave everything they had for people they had never met, for a species they had no obligation to protect. When I asked Admiral why, he told me something I will never forget. He said that when humans give their word, they keep it. When they call someone a friend, they mean it with every fiber of their being. Turned to face directly, and the old admiral met his gaze without flinching. We have studied your history since then. We have learned about your wars and your struggles and the countless times you have nearly destroyed yourselves. Many species in this galaxy look at humans and see only violence and danger. They see predators from a death world, survivors of a planet that tried to kill them every day of their existence. They are afraid of what you might do if that fury were ever turned against them. He stepped forward, his light growing brighter with each word. But we have seen another truth. Yes, you are fierce. Yes, you are dangerous. You carry within you the legacy of a world that has no mercy for the weak, but you choose to use that strength in defense of others. You choose to stand between the helpless and those who would harm them. You choose love over indifference, courage over safety, sacrifice over self-preservation. His voice rang through the great hall like a bell. The galaxy has many powerful species. Many have fleets that could darken the skies of 1,000 worlds. Many have weapons that could crack planets like eggs. But I have learned that true strength is not measured in firepower or numbers. It is measured in the willingness to stand beside those who cannot stand alone. It is measured in promises kept and friends defended and lives given without hesitation for the sake of strangers. Raised his crystalline arms, his light blazing with colors that had no names in human language. We asked for help. We received so much more than we could ever have imagined. We received family. And on behalf of the people and all the species who have joined this coalition, I say to you now what we should have said from the beginning. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. Thank you. Thank you for answering our call. Thank you for fighting our battles. Thank you for bleeding and dying for people you had never met. The stars are colder and darker than any of us would like to believe. But knowing that humans stand watch among them, ready to answer any call for help with everything they have, makes the universe feel a little less empty. The chamber erupted in applause. Humans and aliens together rose to their feet, their voices joining in celebration of the bond that had been forged in fire and blood. Outside the great windows, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the struggles of the beings who lived beneath their light. But for those who had fought at and those who would fight in battles yet to come, the universe would never feel quite so hostile again, because somewhere out there stood watch, and they would always answer the call. Admiral stood in the front row, his eyes bright with emotion he would never admit to feeling. Beside him, Captain Carter wiped at her face with the back of her hand. In the rows behind them, soldiers and officers who had faced death without flinching found themselves struggling to maintain composure. Stepped down from the platform and walked directly to. The crystalline ambassador extended his fragile hand, and the human admiral took it gently in his own. No words were necessary. Some bonds run deeper than language, deeper than species, deeper than the void between stars. They had asked for help and humanity had answered. That was enough. That would always be enough. The ceremony ended, but the story was just beginning. Across the galaxy, other species watched and wondered and hoped. They had heard the tales of who defended the helpless. They had seen what happened when humans called you friend. And in the darkness between stars, more calls for help were being sent, reaching toward Earth with desperate hope. Humanity would answer them all, because that was simply what humans did.